book. Welcome to the show. I think I just started. Hey, welcome to the show. I'm Rudy Maxa, travel journalist and broadcaster, and delighted to have you here. You know, every 2 weeks we do a webcast, and I tried to bring along someone who's interesting in the travel field. And we got a great guest this week. Her name is Patricia Schultz. You may recognize that. She has written an enormous bestseller, wrote it 20 years ago, actually, and she's updating it, called 1,000 Places to See Before You Die. It has been translated into, 25 different languages. It has sold tens of millions of copies. She is in her home in New York. She's going to join me in just a minute. But, I often begin with a taste of a wine from a part of the country, a part of the world that I find interesting. And I'm going to do one from Uruguay today. That might be a place you haven't visited. I've got to tell you, it's one of my favorite places. It's sort of one of my secret places. I don't know. I started going there 15 years ago. I think my girlfriend and I went 3 out of 4 years back then to Uruguay. I've been back since a couple times. And they have a very, by world standards, young and small wine industry, but it's a great place for growing grapes because it's right on the Atlantic Ocean. Some of the vineyards, and they've got clay and hard scrabble earth, which is really good for vines that are working to reach down and dig water deep and make a great red wine. They do red, they do white. I have one. I've got to tell you, I got to reach down to get it. Excuse me. I've never tried this one before. It was the only one I could find at my local store here in Minneapolis. I know the light isn't great, is it? Can you see it here? There we go. That's a little better. It's from Casa Magrez, Magrez. Maybe you don't pronounce the Z. Maybe it's just Magrez. Oh, maybe it is. It's a 2016, and it is I presume it is the sort of official wine from here. Tanit is the wine of Uruguay. It's also very prominent in Argentina. It's a great, deep, luscious red. This one's got some Merlot in it as well, apparently, and Cabernet Franc. So it's a blend. They don't give me the amount. I will tell you, I opened it last night for dinner. I was not impressed, but I'm going to try it again. I gave it a night to sort of get a little better. It's a 2016, so it's not about age, really. It should be fine. All right, here we go. Pretty color, very purple, nice color. I don't know what just big black thing just appeared on my screen. I don't know what that is exactly, but maybe it's not on yours. Anyway, it's a great color, great deep purple. The nose is nice. Nose is very nice. Let's see if it's any better than it was last night. It's a little rough. I would not run out to get this. But let me tell you, there are 3 grape growing regions in Uruguay. Now, keep in mind, Uruguay is above Argentina and beneath Brazil, along the Atlantic coast, the right side of South America. And it is probably the smallest of those, at least smaller than Argentina. I know it is in wine production. And its wine is more European than South American in style, probably because of the ocean. The 2 main wines I said is Tanit, which it's got great color, great tannin, and acidity. I will say that for this wine. And then there's the Albarino grape, which you may know from Portuguese wine. And some people actually say that the wines here taste a little like the wines of Portugal. It is, I think, an up-and-coming place to buy wines from. I would suggest one particular wine. There's a small town in Uruguay that I go to for lunch. It's the only reason to go there. It used to be a railroad town for farmers. The railroad stopped going. And so a very rich guy took over and built a restaurant there. It's called Garzon, Garzon. And that restaurant, I think, has a Michelin star, but you've got to drive into the countryside inland to go there. And a billionaire just a couple of years ago, opened an enormous winery there. I mean, it is so huge. I have not been able to visit it. The one time I went up to the gates was 4 p.m, and they said they were just closing. But I would check for wine from Garzon. But this is getting better. This is better than last night, I'll tell you that. At any rate, Uruguay is something you shouldn't overlook. You can fly into Montevideo has a beautiful airport, one of the most beautiful airports in the world, I think, architecturally. And you can fly into Buenos Aires and spend a couple nights there or a night there. And then you just take about a 1-hour ferry across a little river, and you're in Uruguay. A town called Colonia is where the ferry comes into. It's a very easy place to go to, and I rent a car there. I rented a car from Hertz. It looked like it had been through a world war, frankly, but I spent a week driving around Uruguay, and I just love that country. Punta del Este is the most famous city. It's where rich Argentines go for their holidays. It's starting to look like Miami Beach. I went there, 35 years ago, and there's nothing there but a few restaurants and a downtown. Now it's high rises and the Conrad Hotel and da 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 da. At any rate, Jose Ignacio is sort of the main city. I actually go a little further toward Brazil, a little further north, and stay in Jose Ignacio, which has very few hotels, so you've got to book way, way ahead. All right, let's get on to our guest. She has been patiently waiting, I trust. You can say hello to Patricia Schultz. Hi, Patricia.
Hi, how are you?
I forgot to tell you to bring a glass of wine here. And I know it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
I know. Somewhere it's happy hour.
Well,
maybe,
it is.
Maybe in Uruguay. I was listening to everything you were saying because Garzón is like one of my secrets no longer. And Uruguay in general, it's this little pocket, it's this little gem that people are so busy seeing all of Argentina, which they should, and Brazil to the north of that, which is enormous. But then tucked in between is this wonderful little country with a coastline, like you said, and also this kind of burgeoning wine scene that is very interesting to, well, just about anybody who likes wine, because also where there's great wine, there's always great food, isn't there?
True.
Yeah.
And the largest city is Montevideo, the capital, which has a very international airport, which has, at least in the regular times, has a nonstop flight from New York on American. I generally fly either United or Delta or American into Buenos Aires and then take the boat over to Colonia.
Yeah, the boat's super easy.
And Montevideo, I think it's got about a quarter of the population of Uruguay. It is the place to be in. And who's the celebrity chef in Garzón who opened that restaurant? I mean,
Malman.
Oh, right. Francis Malman's restaurant is there. And
he's probably the #1 chef, certainly in South America. But he's got a number of places, and he kind of stepped back and started this little place in Uruguay, I'm sure imagining that it would ultimately be as successful and world known as it would become, because he's so famous, he's so incredibly talented. But in the moment before it kind of caught on, it was a very special little kind of getaway when you wanted to, leave all of the big city names, the big restaurants, the big money, the big everything. He started something kind of small and modest, which, as you said, has grown into something far more known.
It wasn't just his fantasy. He was sure of it. I had lunch with him, about a month after he opened that restaurant years ago. And he said, all my jet set friends are going to come here, look at these houses that farmers left behind that are empty. They're going to make fabulous mansions out of them. This is going to be an international capital of the world. One guy did. He actually had a Rolls Royce parked in his garage, or a Bentley, one or the other. I can't remember which. And he did his place up for signs with a pool. But it's still a farming town. But people beat a path to Malman's restaurant, and you walk in, and there are all these Europeans, Americans doing stages in his kitchen, all dressed in impeccable whites, cooking away as if you're in downtown Paris. Really, I think he's got also 3 or 4 hotel rooms there at a pricey thing per night. But okay, well, enough. I thought it was my secret place. I didn't know it was your secret place.
Sorry. Well, that makes 2 plus a couple thousand of us.
I should tell you, speaking of a couple of thousand of us, we are doing this interview live. It's on Facebook and YouTube, but we are recording it as well. So today is June 10th of 2021. So if you're watching this later on YouTube, as many people do, you should know that what we're talking about is current as of June 10th, 2021. So we are sort of coming out of COVID. Some European countries are starting to open, sort of. Other countries, Iceland's open. Croatia's open. I'm going there in a couple of weeks. But anyway, we're in this sort of in-between COVID stage, which we hope continues to make progress in the direction it's going. So please keep that in mind if you're watching. That may all be ancient history to you if you're watching this 6 months or a year or 2 years later. But Patricia's book endures. It's been for 20 years. You can see part of the cover behind this, 100 places to see before you die. Let's start at the beginning, Patricia. You were drawn to travel early on in your career, weren't you? Tell us about that. Where'd you grow up? Where'd you wind up as a travel journalist?
I was just reading a Facebook page for travelers, and the question thrown out was, I'm sure most of you were born into families where you traveled early, and your parents kind of dragged you along to wonderful places around the globe. And this person who had posed the question was feeling quite disadvantaged because, in fact, she had never traveled. And I really identified with her because we never traveled. We, had very modest means. And for us to go to the Jersey Shore every August was huge for us, and almost a religious experience because we never missed a year. I was packed in the backseat of the station wagon, the old clunker, probably a week in advance. It was very important to us, but it wasn't grand, and it was always the same thing, and yet it was always new and exciting. And it instilled in me this importance and the appreciation and the love for breaking away from the same old. Imagine being 6 years old and already knowing that life was pretty predictable and pretty repetitive, as comfortable and as modest and lovely as it was. But that August to me was everything.
Did you have siblings in that station wagon? Did you have siblings?
Yeah, there was a sister in the back seat with me, and we, quarreled all the way. It was 4 very long hours before we had air conditioning. But that, the sand and the sea and the surf and the boardwalk and everything, it was exciting. And it was a real, it really embedded in me this notion that there was a great beyond. There was a sense of beyond the bubble. So everything that was comfortable was, lovely enough, but it was, that perennial August for me really became my kind of incentive or my motivation to behave myself the other 11 and a half months of the year. But anyway, so I wasn't born into a family that instilled in me, I didn't have a passport at 5. I wasn't, wintering in Gstaad. I wasn't, so I think it depends on the individual. You don't need to have your family introduce you to travel at a young age. I think it's either born in you the sense of curiosity. I was always incredibly curious and like to think that I still very much am. So anyway, that was my earliest memory. I was 4, and it was travel, and it was the Jersey Shore. So that's pretty sweet.
When did it occur to you you could make a living or sort of a living by traveling?
I went through university, still pondering how
Where?
Georgetown, Washington, D.C., our nation's capital.
My hometown.
So I never really needed to leave campus to feel that I was in this, League of Nations, because not only was I surrounded by all these embassies of the world in my backyard, but even within the campus limits itself, we had students from all over the world. And I thought I had died and gone to heaven. And I thought, well, maybe this is as far as I'll ever travel, is across campus to my, Colombian friends' party. But they did regularly remind me that these great places from around the world, from whence they came, were exactly places that I needed to experience myself at some point, but I didn't know how to make it happen. So I just kind of stumbled along. After graduation, everybody went on to very impressive apprenticeships in Wall Street and the Foreign Service. And I just grabbed my passport and went to Italy. My mother's from Italian background, so my excuse was that I would explore my roots. And that was supposed to be for a few weeks, and it turned out to be for 4 years. 4 very impressionable, informative, life-altering, really, kind of years that then led me to other great things. When I was there, I would explore every last niche and corner of Italy. And as you know, there are many of them, because it's probably one of the countries that I still love to this day that has more per square kilometer than any other country I know of. It has more UNESCO sites than any other country. I think it's at a par with China, which is a little bit larger than Italy. Yeah. And it was the wine, and it was the food, and the people, and the art, and the architecture, and the design. I mean, so those few weeks turned into many years. And so it's the one country I return to the most frequently, because Italy.
And what were you doing to support yourself? And while you answer that, I have this very expensive beauty light here that doesn't seem to be beauty lighting me. So you answer that, and I'll apologize to viewers while I mess around with this light. So how did you support yourself while you're traveling out of Italy, and how did you make that pay eventually?
It's funny. I was just talking to somebody this morning about how you make a gap year happen. And a gap year traditionally is after high school and before university. But my gap year, which turned into many, was following university, and it's meant to, I think, open up your head to the possibilities of where you see yourself to be ultimately, and also to understand a little bit better of how you see yourself in the world, or how you see also, in my case, the U.S., America, because, you know, growing up in upstate New York, to me, New York was everything. The U.S. was everything, kind of the center of the universe. And as soon as you leave, you understand that's not at all the case. But living in Italy, it kind of shifted my whole understanding of how I wanted my life to be. And I wanted to stay there to understand better in a way that I knew just wasn't going to happen at home. So I pretty much took any job that came my way. I was interpreting, I was translating, I was teaching English as a foreign language, I was a governess, I worked in a leather store, I made myself guide for the day without a license. So I was always looking out for the carabinieri or the police, because you're supposed to wear your little, you know, thing saying you were authorized, and I wasn't. And I was making up, you know, wonderful histories of people and the Medicis and artists and, you know, others that I had no idea what I was talking about. But everybody went home happy. And I had many, many friends. One in particular, his name is Giovanni. And it was a wonderful way to learn the language and to learn the history, because the Italians have this inherent appreciation and love for their country and their heritage and their history in a way that, I mean, they were always asking me about particular things, you know, in US history. And I realized that either I slept through that in university, or it's just simply not taught to the degree that Europeans study their own history. So
did you fall in love in Italy?
Just a little. With the country, yes. With Giovanni, definitely. It was interesting because I was of Italian American heritage to also visit the region and the town where my mother came from. This kind of ancestral tourism or roots tourism is one of the initial or the first reasons that often get people off the sofa, off the couch, and to Korea, or in my case, Italy, or to South America, wherever your relatives, sometimes immediately your parents, and oftentimes it's third, fourth generation. But there's always something that remains in you. I know that my friend, who has a very Scottish surname and is maybe fourth generation, still feels incredible, as we all do after watching Outlander, but feels incredibly Scottish. And what's not to love about Scotland? It's one of the most stunningly beautiful countries, not just in Europe, but in the world. And so she's now living there. She moved to Scotland and really found her kind of spiritual home. So it's a wonderful reason. If you don't know where to start, you know, if you know you want to travel and see the world and you don't know where to start, I often suggest that people start with their roots and, you know, kind of take it from there.
Good idea. Good idea. Sorry, I still, you know, I've got this thing this far away from. First of all, let me tell you, I'm in St. Paul, Minnesota. The Mississippi River's behind me. It is 97 degrees and humid. I feel like I'm in my hometown of Washington, D.C.
Wow.
With this light, I'll get a nice tan along with perspiration dripping down my my brow at some point.
I can see you well. You're well lit.
Well, it looks better to me, but still, for how close it is, it's literally 7 inches away from my head. I wanted to ask you about your first book, though. And did that come out of magazine writing, or how did you become a serious author?
I never studied journalism or writing. I never studied tourism, or, you know, I mean, I could write a mean postcard back in the day when one actually sent them. But I was living in Florence and knew Tuscany quite well. And a friend of a friend of a friend times 10 mentioned to somebody back in New York that there was this American living in Florence. I was one of countless, but somehow my name got pumped around and I got a phone call. And it was from a guidebook that no longer exists, Stephen Birnbaum. I don't
know. Of course, I knew Steve.
Yeah, he was quite a visionary.
Right.
And they had written and paid for a chapter that was part of a bigger book on Italy that was going to the printer in another 5 minutes, and it was totally unusable. And could I help? In fact, could I rewrite the chapter? And somehow along my way in life. I understood that you always say yes first and then you figure it out.
Yes.
I don't know how many times I rewrote that chapter, but they got it in record time. They paid me $1.50. I would have paid them $1.50 for just seeing my name in print, which actually never happened, but I didn't understand that in the moment. And that was when I kind of dipped my toe into the pool of travel writing. It was a guidebook. It was about Italy. And then I wrote about Europe. And then I wrote about the world. And I put in my 10,000 times 10,000 hours and ultimately wound up with a publisher in America that had this great notion of places you needed to see once in a lifetime.
Who came up with the 1,000, Patricia?
Well, we were going to initially, in fact, we had a mock cover of the book made up in our first meeting. And it was 100 places, 100 drop dead places. Mm-hmm. And it didn't do a lot for me, but it was very much on the same page, if I may, with this idea of what I had always wanted to do, which was to gather all of these places and things around the world, not just in Italy and not just in Europe, but globally, that had always just, and everybody was always calling or faxing back then. My daughter's going on her honeymoon, where should she go? Or it's my parents' 50th anniversary, where shall I send them? Or I finally retired, where do I start? And I realized that I had this head that was bursting at the seams and a Rolodex that knew no end. And I had always wanted to do some of, the best of the best of the best. Of course, the idea of what is the best is very
subjective.
Yeah. But I met a publisher who was so much in sync with what I wanted to do and pretty much gave me carte blanche as soon as they decided that the 100 looked much better with a 0 added. And they tweaked the title, which back then was not even part of our lingo. Now everything is to do before you die, but this was in the 90s.
Yeah,
and,
years ago.
And there was a person or three who said that's too alarming, it'll never sell, it's way too much stuff, it's overwhelming, it's overload, let's hone it down to a dozen great places. But they were convinced, and lo and behold, so they gave me a year to do it. They said take 2, it took 8. It came out just after September 11th. Had it been released when it should have, it would have come out at a most inopportune time. But in 2003, because you were mentioning before, we're approaching our 20th anniversary. And in 2003, people were just starting to travel again. It was a year or two after September 11th. Those were years not unlike during this pandemic,
right.
But it was mostly the US and certainly New York, when people were staying very close to home. Now it's quite different in that this has enveloped the world, but people are starting to venture out again with a newfound appreciation for what we were kind of deprived of for reasons totally understandable. But hopefully we're approaching travel as we did back in post-September 11th with a new respect, not just for the notion that the world is our playground, but for the people who have been really deeply impacted financially and professionally. Because I was listening to somebody talk about the safari industry in Africa, and people who are on the periphery who literally lived from tourist to tourist have just been in their horrible
situation. Right. You're absolutely right. Let me, we'll explain what a Rolodex is to the kids a little later, Patricia. But let me tell you, if you just tuned in, my guest is Patricia Schultz. She's the world famous, I think that is not an understatement, author of a best-selling book, and that's really not an understatement, called 1,000 Places to See Before You Die. It came out 20 years ago in subsequent editions, and she's working now on the 20th anniversary edition, which will come out, well, I'll ask her about in just a moment. But let me also repeat, if you're watching this on YouTube after the fact, we are broadcasting live on June 10th, 2021. So when we talk about COVID and the world opening up, that is the world we are in right now. Hopefully, if you're watching this 6 months from now, or 10 months from now, or 3 years from now, that won't be the world you're in, and COVID will just be a footnote in your history books, or at least a footnote for your kids. Okay, so Patricia Schultz, you're working on a revised edition. Is it due out in 2023, did you tell me? 2022?
Sorry?
Is it due out in 2020? Oh, the lawnmower master, by the way, he's joining us on the show as well. The guy said, let me ask my boss, and he disappeared. I thought it was okay, but I guess the boss said, I don't care if he's, I thought we were doing a TV show to make it sound really important. Apparently not all that important. He's over here mowing the lawn. And anyway, you're doing this book out in 2023 or 2022?
Yes.
2023.
Yes.
What do you do when you redo a book of 1,000 places? I know you can't go to all 1,000 to do it.
Well, it's not the first update. We update it about every 5 years because, in fact, it actually takes that long for me to not revisit each of the 1,000 places, but to keep visiting those I haven't yet seen. So the burning question has always been since day one, have you visited all of these places? So no, I have not. And my postscript to that stock answer is that A, I would need to live to be 400 years old in order to say that, and B, I would need a very handsome trust fund to have got me to all of these places and to really clone myself, to go back time and again to check and make sure that they, to vet them and make sure they still belong in the book. But I have an incredible network of friends, either who live in these destinations, who specialize in this particular region or city or country, whose opinions I respect and who are there regularly and whose updated opinion I can take as part of my overall impression of what needs to go into the next book. I do include new places with every update or revision, and I keep the same title because I often merge 2 or 3 places into one. For example, in the first edition, I gave a number of different Maya ruins, destinations in the Yucatan or in Mexico, all of which became one merged entry about the Ruta Maya, the Mayan route, which is a pilgrimage for those interested in that particular period of history in Mexico or in Mexico and Central America. And so making 5 entries one, I would then open up the book to 4 other places, not so much in Mexico, but in Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, other places that I had since visited. So the book is always a kind of work in progress. It reflects my more recent travels, as well as return trips to places I love. I mentioned before, Italy is a place I go back to regularly whenever I can. My husband is Greek. We're going hopefully this summer, knock on wood. There are a mere 200 inhabited islands in Greece. Like, as a lot of people seem to think there's Santorini and Mykonos and maybe 2 or 3 others. I try to always see, new islands every time I go back. So I'm always on the lookout for something new, and not just what is trending, but what is trending in my head, because the words of wisdom that the publisher gave me 100 years ago when I was first starting to write this book was, I said to him, who is my reader? I was used to writing for different publishers who had an agenda and who had a focus and they would know the demographic and they would know everything from, the age to the favorite foods that their readers were eating. And he said to me, write for yourself. And I thought, well, that's both a wonderful and a daunting thing, because I was interested in so much. There were no barriers or boundaries. There were no particular regions that didn't draw me. And I would go to a city or a town or a destination, kind of hitting the road upon arrival, to see as much as I could, not just for my own interests, but for, the professional reasons of the book. I wanted my reader to be everyone. So do you need to feel you have to see all these 1,000 places in your lifetime? Maybe not, but you'll be hard pressed to not find a couple hundred at least that kind of, jump off the page at you, or really, have you grabbing your passport.
I have 2 questions. I presume, number one, I presume the answer is yes, is that your readers will certainly alert you if, that famous cathedral burned down you wrote about last week, so you'll know that. And do you I'm an inveterate clipper of things I see. Even one sentence on a place in some magazine, I clip it out, thinking I got to go there. And so I have all of these clips, newspapers, magazines, notes of all these places I need to get to. I would imagine you're afflicted with that 1,000 times more. And by the way, I know we're on a new platform for many of our viewers, but you can ask comments like we put on the old ones. So feel free to ask a comment, and I will send it on to Patricia. Okay, so you have piles of magazine clippings and newspaper clippings everywhere.
Yeah, I've destroyed many forests.
Right.
And I'm also old school. I get this whole digital thing, but I'm like a clipper from way back. I also have a dear friend who's helping me make sense of it all so that I have archives. And with every update, I use them extensively. And then I toss them because no sooner are they used than they're probably dated. But to me, a lot of the small, seemingly insignificant things are what draw me. But in the same breath, I have to understand that between this moment when you and I are discussing a certain place in, the south of France to 2023 when the book is on the shelf or on the screen, things change. So I've become less and less sucked into this rabbit hole of all of these great fourth generation places that are very vulnerable and very fragile, especially during the pandemic, because there is no guarantee that during that period of time from now until then, that they'll still be around. So I try to make it as evergreen as possible. And yet, like you said, look at Notre Dame, who in a million years would have thought that Notre Dame would no longer be with us. No. And they were remember back in the moment, Macron was saying that for the 2024 Olympics, that it would be, well, I don't think so. So it's still important enough for people to go and see it and to observe it from, almost out of respect. And it's very centrally located. I wouldn't have somebody get in a car.
We're on the Mississippi here, Patricia.
Oh, that's cool. I heard that you didn't know where the Mississippi.
You saw that. I'm an New York, Washington, D.C. guy. I came out here for a speech decades ago, and we crossed this river. I said to the driver, the grass is looking good, by the way. Said to the driver, "What river is this?" He said, "What's the Mississippi?" I said, "No, really. I really need to know what river it is." He said, "What's the Mississippi River?" I said, "Listen, I'm a traveler. I really need to know what." He said, "Where do you think the Mississippi?" And he did it. And that's when I went, "Where do you think the Mississippi begins?" I went, "Minnesota?" It does. So north of Itasca, it's a little stream, and it gets bigger. And by the time I get here, I've got faux paddle wheel boats here, right off my balcony here, and barges as well.
Well, it's interesting because after I wrote 1,000 Places to See in the World, it was such an immediate success that I had that phone call from my publisher that every travel writer and every writer hopes to hear. And that's, why don't you come in and we'll discuss your next project? And this was like 3 minutes after I had promised myself that I would never undertake a project of that breadth and that size again. And thinking, I need a few years to recoup and recharge. And I went in the next day. And I thought, and he thought that we would do a kind of we thought we'd go microscopic and do 1,000 places in New York City. Well, maybe not. 1,000 places in Italy or 1,000. And in fact, our various foreign publishers did their own versions of that with our blessing. Mm-hmm. But we decided that probably there was no country in the world that promised the variety, the diversity, and the importance of a title of that nature for, looking back into our own backyard. And it was the USA and Canada. We included Canada because our wonderful neighbors to the north. I still think that much of the country is protected parkland in Canada, but it has great cities, and on the coastal areas, there are fantastic things to see. But it was the US that, I had this fleeting moment of, oh, really? I'm a big patriotic, see America first kind of New York City travel writer, knowing that the possibilities, there was an embarrassment of possibilities. But it came to be one of the most enlightening 6 years versus 8 experiences.
6 years?
I think from the moment we had that conversation to the day that it was on the shelf, it was probably 4 or 5, not 6. But it took far longer than everybody thought, just because they thought, well, you can go to Minnesota for the weekend. But in fact, I spent a lot of, you could.
Or in my case, for 20 years.
But anyway, it was interesting, and it was at that point that I understood that, where the Mississippi, went on far beyond Hannibal.
Right.
Right. It's amazing. It's amazing what Americans do not know about geography, about history, about our national parks. Somebody said to me last week that they've been to all 12 of our national parks, and I thought, your clock stopped about 100 years ago. So I felt that I had a challenge to educate anybody who picked up the book to open their eyes to what America offered. So that was the follow-up. When I wasn't doing updates of the World book, I was writing up 1,000 places to see in the USA and Canada.
How have you been at it long enough now to know how big a project the 2023 book is going to be? Is it a massive project? Is it?
Nobody told me, but nobody told me about this pandemic happening.
That cuts you out. That cuts some time out, right?
Oh, it makes what is a daunting experience almost impossible.
Right.
And I've been talking to others who are in the travel guide. This book is not a conventional guide per se, but I'm loosely thrown into that niche of travel writing, and they're all tearing the hair out of their head, because what has kind of limped along in the last year and a half and is still in operation doesn't necessarily mean that they can make it through the next year or two, depending upon where they're located in the world. I mean, look at India. India, we're light years beyond so many other countries. We're vaccinated to a degree that other countries will not see for another year. And so when this project is global, I'm reminded every day how difficult it is and how important it is, however, to make the book as evergreen as possible. Yosemite will always be there, and Iguazu Falls will always be there. And then after that, I need to just be extremely careful and sensitive to what may not survive in the year or two to come.
Are you traveling?
I've been traveling to upstate New York.
Are you going to travel? Is what I should have
said. I do host some trips. In the last year to 5 years, I've hosted quite a number of annual trips, always to different destinations, from Mongolia to Iran, which was one of my favorite places and destinations experiences ever. Sorry?
Interesting. Rick Steves says that too. He did a special for public television on Iran. And he got all kinds of guff for it for political reasons. But
I know.
I gather the people are lovely.
Oh, Rick Steves' not documentary, but his special was one of the reasons that I decided that everything I had heard as far back as my freshman year at Georgetown, when some of my first friends ever, like the first 3 days that we were on campus, because the Persians, the Iranians, are that outgoing and sweet and gracious and hospitable and lovely. They were some of my first friends, and for 4 years I heard about, you have to come and visit, you have to come and visit. And that's when the Shah was still in power. Because remember, I went to university 100 years ago. But I did manage to go with a company based in Seattle who specializes in Iran. Americans needed to go together with a group hosted by, a guide that would never leave them, lest we do mischievous things. But it was an outstanding trip. And I had a few booked for last summer, which were postponed until this summer. So this is just a long-winded way of saying that the other day, we finally got the green light to go in August to Romania and Bulgaria. So there are a lot of countries in Europe that are still on the fence. We literally just found out now. So I understand why people are sensitive about going to Europe, because it's still a very unpredictable situation. You know, Europe is a massive area that has 40 some countries, and each country is looking at a recent past that is quite different from just the next country over, depending upon their government and their protocols and their history with COVID in the last year plus. So that's really the next trip I'm looking at, followed by Greece. Greece seems to be doing well. They've been open for not very long, but, you know, knock on wood, everything goes as they hope for, because these are countries whose average individual has always been very much determined by the success of the tourist season.
Yeah, I think of Thailand as well. I think you answered the first question everyone asked you, and to some extent me, at the beginning of our chat, which was Italy is your favorite place in the world.
I guess so. Have you've been?
Have been to Italy?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've done like 10 television shows there for public television.
Well, guess I got to catch up on those.
Yeah, there are 98 of them. You got your. Don't worry about that. But what would be your second or third favorite places?
You know, that's always such a loaded question, because
it is.
You know, it depends on
mood, season, food.
Yeah, it depends on your experience there. I mean, did you go alone, and did you spend most of the time there in your hotel room, or did you go with a small group and have the time of your life? Did you go off season thinking it was a good idea, and it was monsoon time, or
did you fall in love?
Yeah, or did you go off season, and you had unseasonably gorgeous weather and you had the entire, country to yourself? So I think, although it's repetitive, I would almost say that Iran, which may unfortunately have been a one-off situation, if your country is so important to you or such a favorite, a perennial favorite, don't you go back time and again and again? And Iran, I may just save that one experience as having been a trip of a lifetime and not return, because it's not an easy trip. It's not an inexpensive trip, and politically and everything else, it may not be possible to us. Although I'm feeling more confident with travel to that area of the world now than I was recently. So I think I might even say Iran, because to me, yeah.
I wouldn't have guessed. How long were you there?
It was that special.
How long were you there?
Almost 3 weeks. So we covered we flew in through Istanbul. And when I was in the waiting room connecting, we had a few hours at the Istanbul airport from Istanbul to Tabriz in northern Iran, which is up near Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan, an area of the world about which at that time I knew very little. We already were being approached by Iranians who were living in Istanbul and going back home to Tabriz, and would we like to come and have dinner with them?
Right.
And our guide said, they're going to ask you to come home for dinner. Do not accept. We can't do that. And I was saying, oh, well, there are 10 of us. Oh, bring your friends. And that was the first of untold gestures of from the heart hospitality and curiosity of America and their love for anything that smelled of America. So in that moment, I understood that it was going to be a trip of a lifetime. And every day it was something incredibly wonderful and different. And the food, oh my God. And that was without taking everyone up on their offer to go home for, grandma's specialty, which is twice as good as whatever you were eating in the restaurants, which were great. So yeah, that's probably my second. I always wanted to go to Northern Korea as well. I mean, there are these quirky, unexpected destinations where you really understand how different the world is in these different corners of the globe, and how, America is seen through a different lens. And how you go home either with a newfound appreciation of what you've left, or just having had your ideas shifted about home and how you were raised to think.
Well said. Well said. Let me ask you one last question. I'll let you go back to your clips. Did you go to Georgia? Have you been to
Georgia.
the country of Georgia. I really like that place. I've only been there once. Want to go back.
Yeah, and Armenia seems to just like
Time to go
live in the shadow of Georgia, which is unusual because there's a massive Armenian American community in the U.S. And they're very much proud of their country, and they should be. But you know, the focus in the last many years seems to have been on Georgia, as it should be, because it's something astonishing, right? And the food, as wonderful as it is in Georgia, is every bit as great
and
in
well
Armenia.
priced.
Yeah. So, and they're neighboring countries, and it's quite easy to get from one to the other. So I think that slowly, Armenia is kind of getting on the bandwagon with promotion and maybe even a tourism board, I don't know, to kind of get the word out. But I do encourage people, as long as you're going that far and you're in the neighborhood, you may as well experience Armenia as well. But the topography, the countryside is really, really breathtaking, isn't it?
The Dolomites ain't bad. Yeah.
Yeah.
Patricia, thank you so much for spending time on a weekday with us. I apologize for the lawnmower, for my dark facade, for my problems with the lighting here. I don't know.
It's very authentic.
Well, yeah, you're watching the sausage get made. When you do TV, of course, when the lawnmower guy comes, you sit and wait till he's gone. Here, there's no choice. Patricia Schultz is the author of the book, and a new one will be out in 2023 called 1,000 Places to See Before You Die. It's an enormous international bestseller, and it's so generous of you to spend time with me. And again, if you're watching this not on June 10th, 2021, when we're recording it, keep that in mind. Thank you, Patricia, and thank you all for watching, and travel safely. I hope there's a whole lot more traveling coming in our future. Take care.